The rail industry is moving fast. Can you afford to be left behind? We are RTM. We're here to keep you in the loop with rail industry news, giving you an all-access pass to the key decision makers in the industry, and together we'll shape the future of rail.
We are the RTM team. I'm Matt.
I'm Ilsa. And I'm Emily.
And each episode we'll be chatting to the innovators and leaders in the rail industry, showing it to you in a whole new light.
This podcast is brought to you by Trans-City Rail, the premier rail networking events brand connecting buyers with suppliers.
So welcome to today's RTM podcast. Hosting today is myself, Ailsa, and I'm joined by Matt.
Hello, I'm back in the hosting seat again. It's been a little while.
And today's guest is Debbie Francis, Managing Director at Direct Rail Services. Thank you for joining us today, Debbie.
Good morning, thank you.
And just to start off with, would you mind introducing yourself and explaining a little bit about your role that people might not know what it exactly is?
Well, as you've already said, I'm Debbie Francis. I am the Managing Director at Direct Rail Services Limited, and Direct Rail Services is a freight operator in the UK, only in the UK. It is a government-owned entity, so it's a non-departmental entity owned by the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority. My role is probably one of the most straightforward in the company in so many ways. Clearly, I set strategy, but we don't set strategy every day. So once we've set strategy, that's been done for a while, needs to be reviewed. So it's my job, if you believe leadership is a thing, and I have some issues about that we may cover later, but if you believe leadership is a thing, I suppose it's my job to lead the business, to set a vision and a strategy, and to give people, all of the colleagues that work with me, the ability to be able to do their jobs. I spend a great deal of time travelling around my organisation, meeting everybody. I do like a cab ride, because being in the rail industry, we all do become quite train obsessed eventually. So I do like a cab ride, and I'm fortunate enough to have ridden in some of the best traction in the country, which, depending on your point of view, could be the class 68 or 88, or it could be the class 37. Anybody from the rail industry listening to this, which is hopefully plenty of people will understand what I'm talking about, very, very different locos. So that's a really great, fun part of my job. My other job, I suppose, has been to look at, as part of our strategy for the company, how we move the company forward. Not just in terms, for me, of its revenue and its growth, but in terms of making it a company fit for the future, making it a company fit for future talent, getting it to develop its policies and the way it goes about things and the way it views work and work life in a way, I think, that's going to better fit the future and the new talent that's going to come along. So I suppose it's a little bit vague, but as MD, I don't get up and actually drive a train every day, so it is a little vague as to what I do. But that's the key parts of the role.
Yeah, and I suppose looking at your route to your current role and your past history, you bring quite a broad scope of expertise to that. I think we were looking into you previously doing research. Been finance director at London North West Route. You've been a chair at Cumbria Education Trust, and now in Direct Rail Services as MD and a freight operator. It's quite a diverse mix there, and I'm sure that's an expertise not many in your field have.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. I've actually worked in a number of industries through my career as well. So, obviously the Education Trust is a separate thing. I'll mention on it briefly, but I took quite a circuitous route through my career. I left school at 16 from reasonably difficult circumstances, no qualifications, this sort of thing. So I had to get a job. It was not an option for me from a family perspective. So I went on a youth opportunities programme, and I went back to night school for 5 years, and I worked through that time just doing whatever jobs I could get, and I constantly worked. And then I got enough qualifications to go to Polytechnic, so I did. And I did business studies, which I thoroughly enjoyed, but I was best at the finance aspect. So when I came out, I got a contract as a trainee accountant, and that's why I went into finance. But the good thing about finance is that you can transfer across industries. Finance tends to be finance regardless of where you're going. Now, one of the big things, having said that, to get really good in finance, it's not just about producing those numbers, but it's about reading the numbers like a story. And I seemed to find that was something that I was able to do. To do that, though, you've got to understand the business, because you need to know what you're expecting to see.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can look at the set of numbers, and it's like looking at a picture. You can see what's wrong, what's right, where some of the issues might be that need to be done. You can become a really good right-hand person to any leader in an organisation in steering some of the thinking and some of the things that they look at and consider. So, and also through finance, you often get the chance to get involved in payroll and services like this, which tends to bring you into HR areas. You often get involved in procurement issues, and then I was fortunate enough to get involved in bids and acquisitions, in mergers and such through the different companies. So I moved through a number of companies. After I was qualified as an accountant, I worked in IT infrastructure and application development, American corporation, went abroad to Venezuela with them. That gave me a really good leg up in terms of the positions that I held. Then I came back and I went into infrastructure maintenance, which is very high. The work I was involved in, or the contracts we had, very high volume, low value type works. I worked on MOD contracts and housing contracts and things like this. Really fascinating. Got a really big breadth of experience in that. And then I moved, still in finance initially, to Network Rail. So I changed industry again and went into the rail industry. And the rail industry has been by far and away the best industry I've worked in so far. I think partly because it's the hardest to understand, to get your head around.
Yeah.
The levers in rail, you pull one lever over here, in most businesses you understand what that's going to impact. Sometimes in rail that can still take me, even now, completely by surprise. And that's great, because it means all the time you get up and you get a challenge. So I think I gained quite a lot of experience in L&W on the railway, and I was made commercial director as well as finance director quite a short space of time on that route. And that got me involved in the managed stations, because I had responsibility for those. Stakeholder management, delay attribution, the bane of everybody's life. And consequently I got headhunted to become a managing director. And I think for lots of people who are finance directors, some of them will either stay as finance directors, very, very happy. Many others have the ambition to eventually become a managing director or chief exec. So that's how it worked out for me. So you're right, a very mixed career, but all of it, I think, building on the types of skills that you need to anywhere in business.
Definitely, I think we sort of see that from a lot of our guests. There isn't necessarily one solid route up to the top in especially rail. People come in from all sorts of places, all sort of expertise, and work their way up.
So have you seen any particular difference between working with freight compared to Network Rail, or is it all kind of mixed into the same thing?
No, it's not. It's really different. I think it's been helpful for me to have been in Network Rail first. I believe I am slightly more empathetic of the issues that arise on the railway, and that impact my business when these issues arise, because I understand there's a huge amount of blame goes to Network Rail where that blame isn't actually correctly attributed. But there isn't anywhere else for it to go. It isn't that, it's like, well, it was actually somebody else's fault. There are so many things happening on the railway that are set to be, Network Rail's issue. But at the end of the day, they've got very little control over some of those things. So I think I understand things more, but it's really different. So freight operators, we are very different from the passenger operators as well, because we work in a completely commercial environment. And each piece of business we gain, we then have to go and negotiate a route to run that path on, and pay for that route to run that path on, and try and arrange the times that we can get onto the route. So every single piece of work, unlike the passenger industry where you get your franchise, and if that's the way the rail's going to carry on, you get your franchise, and you've got those paths available when you need to fill them with the trains. It's really different in freight. We basically start with nothing, and then we get a piece of work that we have a client or customer who wishes to run a service from X to Y, and we go and negotiate the route. And there are issues in that. There's, you're probably aware, there are an awful lot of passenger pressures on the system, and I know that as freight operators we don't always feel that we're top of the list in terms of attention. And I know as well that Network Rail are trying to address this. they are trying to make efforts to ensure that freight are included, because we're really important for the economy. We're really important. We're really important for the government's agenda, for example, in reducing emissions. So there are lots of things that mean, we need to have that space. And I know that Network Rail are conscious of it and trying to do it, but it is completely different trying to operate even from a passenger operator. Because I used to deal with passenger operators all the time in the Network Rail, but not the freight operators. Really, really different trying to operate as a freight operator. But I think, or hope, although I do get frustrated occasionally, I hope that I'm a little bit more understanding of the problems that I know that they have, and that it's a whole system thing. So you can't blame one person in this system. The railway is a system thing, and it's got, we talked before about the levers. It's got this huge amount of levers that don't always operate in the way that you quite think they're going to work or that people were expecting, and you just simply can't predict everything. So it can be challenging, to say the least, but I find the passenger pressures are the hardest for the freight operators. And we always used to laugh in the freight world because if only boxers could tweet, we might get more attention. So we all said the best innovation anyone could ever come up with is to create a tweeting box. So that when the passengers sit there saying, I'm waiting for a broken freight train, we can say, I've been sitting in this lay-by for 2 hours waiting for a passenger train to come past. So I do think everybody needs more understanding of the matters, to be fair. Everybody just needs to understand everybody's position a little bit better.
Yeah, like you say there, it's sort of, there isn't as much of an angry voice for freight because the boxes don't talk. Yeah. Even among sort of freight operators, obviously direct rail services are a little bit different. There's obviously the partnership and effectively being run in one side from the nuclear industry. That's not usually a combination of rail and nuclear that you typically expect. No. Especially in a country like this where we don't have as wide a sort of nuclear power network. Years
ago, of course, British Rail used to run the nuclear trains. So we do move quite a lot of spent fuel around this country from the power stations and into Sellafield for reprocessing. And British Rail used to do that. But 25 years ago this year, DRS was set up when British Rail was privatised. Yeah. And at the time, the government, and I think it was the right decision and still do now, decided that the safety, security and reliability aspect of nuclear was too important to leave commercially. Yeah. And that's understandable. Commercial operations purely commercial businesses have different drivers. If we face any sort of issue on a nuclear service, we can throw the kitchen sink at it, literally. Because I'm not being driven by that bottom line at the end of the year. If that bottom line has been marred by having to spend money through the nuclear, for a nuclear issue, then that's not a problem, because that's what we're there for. Yeah. So that pressure, we don't have that pressure in the same way that any commercial operator will have, and will always have. So no matter how hard you can try to say you've got, a balance and we understand the contract terms and we'll always do the best we can, it can be very, very difficult. I worked in the commercial sector for a long, long time, well, for my life until I moved to Network Rail. So I understand those sorts of pressures and how difficult it is. So the decision was made to set up DRS at the time, and that's carried on. The only thing that makes it different is that we're not funded per se by the government. So our contracts are negotiated, I believe, through the NDA, but it's effectively arm's length. So it is the power station providers, for example, who are ultimately paying that bill. But also, you can't run just nuclear services, because nuclear services go up and down and fluctuate quite a lot. And to keep your competence, well, you know from knowing quite a bit about the rail industry, just to keep driver competence, you've got to keep running the routes, or you've got to constantly refresh. And refreshing a route is not a quick thing either. So you've got to try and do other things other than just nuclear, or you wouldn't be able to maintain that service as effectively, as safely and as securely and as reliably, which is paramount if you think about what we move. Yeah. So consequently, DRS moved into commercial freight as well. We're not quite the smallest of the freight companies, but we are sort of second smallest. There's only 5 in the country really, and we compete against our the others on certain things. We don't go after everything, because we always have to remember our focus is to ensure that we never become so distracted we don't run nuclear well. Yeah. But we have this fine balance in fitting in the right amount of work to keep the right skills and the right competencies so that we can continue to deliver nuclear. So yeah, it is a little unusual as a model. It is a little unusual.
So we did a bit of background research on you, of course, before you came in today.
Oh dear.
You're, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're currently studying at Manchester Met. What made you want to further your education? Is this quite hard to sort of juggle alongside your role of Direct Rail Services as well?
To that last question, yes. So I suppose you could say I'm a lifelong learner, and I do enjoy studying. I enjoy learning and doing new things. I'm also a bit of an adventurer, so when I'm not learning new things from studying, I tend to be adventuring. Very different from adrenaline junkie, by the way. So some people say it's like I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I've never bungee jumped in my life. I jump out of a plane for love and money. I don't chase adrenaline, but I am an adventurer. So I'm either tend to be learning or adventuring, and I like new experiences. And learning is one of those things. Currently, I'm also just fitting in on a little basis on the weekends a travel writing course with a company that I volunteer with, and I'm doing a travel writing course by correspondence with them, which has been really interesting for me. So I think it's just lifelong learning. But I went on an adventure as a business person, and this learning thing I have. And then I went on a round the world yacht race. I didn't do the whole round the world. I couldn't take that much time off. I did a leg of it. I sailed from Australia to China, an amateur yacht race. I sailed from Australia to China. And I noticed when I was on the training and when I was on the trip that and this was only 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago, I noticed the skippers were the only professional members of the crew. Yeah. And they were picked, thankfully, for their sailing competence. Mm-hmm. They were brilliant sailors, all of them. But it was fairly obvious that they didn't all display what you traditionally understand to be leadership behaviours. And yet that didn't seem to impact which boats were successful and which boats weren't. Yeah. And this is a bunch of very eclectic group of people on each yacht. They're amateur people who, I'd never sailed in my life till I signed up for the race. All sorts of different motivations and backgrounds and all sorts of things. So that got me wondering, because I'd always read a lot about leadership particularly over the last few years, about why that was. Why leadership did not seem to be very important in the performance. Mm-hmm. And hence my PhD is actually about the irrelevance of leadership in performance. Yeah. So that's what that is about, and it is literally just about interest. So it's not really about fitting in alongside work. It's sort of my hobby. Yeah, I have other hobbies, but it's sort of my hobby. Yeah.
Sort of keeping on that theme of you seemingly being one of the busiest women in the country. You
no,
also when we did the background, you also have worked as a non-executive director at the Lancashire Care NHS Trust.
I do.
First question is, how on earth do we fit all of this in time-wise? But what does that sort of role entail as well?
So non-executive director, I've been a non-executive director for a number of years now. I was already a non-executive director when I started with Direct Rail, so we're only really allowed to do one. Obviously it's declared. It doesn't have a conflict of interest in the NHS. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And to be fair, I've been really encouraging my fellow executives to find non-executive roles, whether that's pro bono or paid. I don't mind. There's just got to be able to contain the amount of time it takes, because it can be really great development for an individual as well. Mm-hmm. You have to approach a non-executive role very differently, and you have to be really careful not to jump into things. You're there as a critical friend and a challenge and a support for that executive. And you're also there to try and ensure that the right sort of governance is in place and things like this. But it's a real balance of making sure, particularly when you are currently working and you're in an operational role, it's a real challenge to remember not to jump in things. But as you move up in senior positions, it almost, although you might have an operational role, and I'm an MD and I've got obviously Chief Operating Officer and a Finance Director, it still becomes really important that you jump into the doing less. Yeah. And you are clear about spending time managing your people to do their best. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And setting vision and making sure that the right conditions are in place. So it becomes quite important as you go through senior levels that you really learn, maybe even in an operational role, how to take a slightly back step on it. And this type of experience of being a nerd and really having to be conscious about that can really help and contribute to it. So I think that it's a two-way thing often. That's the company that you're working for will benefit as well. And then obviously you've got there are a lot more companies now looking for non-executive directors who are in work, and consequent, because they want to get people who are still current, who are seeing some of the issues and things and understand those aspects. And that's not to say a retired person obviously can't bring them. They can, and they bring other skills and things. But to get a better balance, there are a lot of people looking for NEDs who are still in the workplace in a full-time mode, because that keeps things a bit more current. But on that basis, you've got to balance how much time you can expect from your NED, because obviously it is a fine line between how much time I can take away from what is my core role to contribute to the NED role.
So you certainly sound like a lady who is fully switched on. So you were named on the Northern Power Women list for 2019 last year. So why do you think organisations like Northern Power Women are so important?
Oh, I wish after 101 years, was it 100 years last year that votes first became held to some women in the UK, it wasn't everybody. I wish 101 years on we have the problem nailed, but of course we don't have the problem nailed. And whilst I believe we're making fantastic progress over the last few years, the awareness is really improving, there's still such a long way to go. You can read it in every paper every day about something that's wrong. Everything from the Hash Me Too movement, was a great outcome eventually on that yesterday or the day before, to the number of women on boards, and they're still exceeded by the number of chief executives called Mark or something. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? So clearly we're really not there, are we? So I think things like the Northern Power Women are really imperative, because there are quite a lot of us out there, but I'm not sure how visible we've been, and that may be our own fault to some extent, or how visible we've been allowed to be. And I think the more of us out there, the more information going out and examples and role models, the more people, younger people, still out there looking to develop careers, can begin to see that this is normal, that this is possible, that there's been nothing to stop them. I think some of the younger generation are slightly more I've got a slightly better attitude already, and I hope that's partly because of the way we've been bringing up our children. So obviously, we're sitting in a generation where we've been bringing our children up to go, these things don't exist the same. But they've still got all of those little biases that sit around them, influencing them. But I think there's slightly less of it than there was, say, when I was being brought up. And the range of Northern Power Women, if you look at that list of women and the range of careers and industries, it makes it really obvious that there is space for gender equality everywhere. But without the advertising and without the profile that things like MPW bring, then it's not often realised. So it's hugely important just to keep this change going, and to try to make sure it's not going to be another 100 years before there's at least gender balance in the workplace. I mean, we've still got to deal with diversity overall, but at the end of the day, if we can't get the gender balance right, when we make up 50% of the population, then we've really got a problem, haven't we? So it's hugely important. I can't applaud them enough for the work that they do in keeping everybody's profile up there.
Yeah, I suppose we've covered so many different aspects there of sort of improving industry and all of that. I suppose for our readers, let's throw it back, really focused in on rail specifically, and ask you the big question that's been in the news for however many years now of HS2 finally got a bit of a decision, however far that may be, followed through. So what are your views on it being oral?
So I'm really glad we have a decision, because I'm not, strictly speaking, as MD of DRS, I'm not supposed to have views per se on these things, but fortunately there's been a decision, so it's fine for me to kind of sort of say the way I'm thinking. And for me, it isn't just about me being a rail industry expert. I am a northerner through and through, in every sense of the word. So I was very interested in HS2, and I'm really passionate in the outcome. So I'm a believer in HS2. I, having been with Network Rail and understanding the capacity issues that the railway faces and L&W faces, that in itself, and I understand the capacity constraints as a freight managing director and how hard it is for us to get onto the railway. So I'm obviously passionate in building more railway in the country. HS2 is nothing to do with the speed of getting between cities. HS2 is all about capacity. So if you can put the faster trains somewhere else, get more people in and out cities, you can create commuter routes on the other lines that we have. So, L&W can stop as a commuter route more. Or we can put more freight on it, this type of thing. From a northern point of view, the Northern Powerhouse Rail strategy really does rely on HS2. So because that got built into the plan. So in the whole of the east-west connection and all of the strategy going on there, it needs HS2. So if that had been altered, they would have had to go back and take a look, and that delays things and so on. But I also think, I just think nobody ever puts the full story over on HS2. There are so, which, it's not about lying, it's just not about putting the whole thing through.
Mm-hmm.
And I get a little bit sick of people who aren't from the north constantly saying, you don't need this, or you should be doing something else with the money. And it's like, well, actually, if you ask us in the north, most of us, or a lot of us, would say, no, we do. Mm-hmm. And that's what we want. So when you're not here, what right have you got to say? Nobody asked how much Crossrail was going to cost, or I don't think there was even I'm not even aware of much of a consultation about whether Crossrail 2 was going to happen, but it's going to happen. And then the thing about the cost of HS2, I think a couple of things I said on a few weeks ago. Nobody is taking this 100 billion out of a wallet and setting fire to it. Okay, it's money that's going back into the economy on an infrastructure project that will benefit the future. And to say we don't need it is reasonably short-sighted. This country has constantly underestimated its infrastructure requirements for years and years and years. Look what they did when they built motorways. Oh, we never need 4 lanes. Well, what they're doing now? No, they didn't. We never need 4 lanes. We constantly underestimate our requirements for the future. But even if we build it and for some reason we don't need to fill it to the gunnels, which I highly doubt, this industry is still, I think, the fastest growing industry in this country, with people getting on the rail. So even if we don't, that money in the economy, that training, that skills, that incentive that would happen is not wasted money, is it? Yeah. How much of that 100 billion comes back in tax? Yeah. Between 20 and 40% of it is coming back anyway. So let's knock that off the bill. The other thing, when there was talk about not coming up to the north, I was absolutely gutted, because when they put the whole business case together on HS2, the business case, they do this economic indicator, it was actually greatest in the north. So about 6 years ago, I remember putting out on LinkedIn, I'm not sure why they're not building it from the north, because we had the biggest case for it. And of course, if you built it from the north, it was always going to reach London, wasn't it? But that was too late. That's been a done thing. But the cost is quite an important thing. I don't think there's been enough published about why the costs have gone up. And I don't think people understand well enough the type of things that drive it. So first of all, the sheer number of reviews which create delays and consultations that have to happen in this country, and I don't disagree with that, but it's what we require in this country, and our members of the public want, costs a small fortune. In addition to which, we are a little bit of a country full of kind of NIMBYs. We are a bit. We can't help it, and I do understand, and I'm empathetic about people who, say, why is it going through my village? But you know what, it has to go somewhere. And we only have quite a small country, and it wasn't like somebody just stuck a line on and said, oh, we can go there. By the time you take into account heritage sites and wildlife sites and urban conurbations and all sorts of things, there's not that many places a direct line can actually go. Yeah. But also, there was a huge amount, originally the HS2 was designed to be in cuttings for a huge amount of it. I don't know, the HS2 can tell you what this is, but it was, 70% of it was going to be in cuttings, 30% of it was going to be in tunnels. It's now getting near to the other way round, because we live in a country full of NIMBYs. Well, we do understand, do we, how much more expensive it is to put it in a tunnel versus a cutting. Yeah. So I think that far more information needs to be shared about how the costs have increased. It's not just incompetence of people in HS2 and things like this that people want to make out. There are reasons, and there may be, there may be competence issues as well. There may be issues of the supply chain, taking the mickey a little bit because there's not going to be enough supply. I don't know, okay? But there are also a whole heap of other things that are nothing to do with that. that are literally about the nature of the country we live in, the people that are here, and that's actually something we need to be proud of, because we don't just run roughshod across the entire country when we do these things. But it makes things take longer, it makes them more expensive, and every time we make an accommodation in what we're going to do, it drives the cost up.
Yeah, certainly. And I suppose, as you say, even if there are, as is sometimes made out, these incompetencies or these inefficiencies, either way, transparency on where that cost is increased would show that.
Yes, it would. It would, and everyone says, they need to be more efficient. You can't be perfect in everything. There isn't a single commercial company out there that does a perfect procurement every time, or doesn't get taken on a little bit by somebody, whatever. There isn't, but they're not under the public eye. So it isn't that they do it way better than everybody here. They don't. It's just nobody sees it. The visibility and the transparency you have to have, and we can't expect people that work in government organisations, no matter who, to be perfect just because they work in a government organisation. We can expect them to try the hardest. We can expect them to put in the best procedures and policies that they possibly can to ensure that things are done the right way, doing the right thing by everybody. But we can't expect perfection, because people are people. Mistakes get made, things get overlooked. Things happen, and I think sometimes that we just expect too much of our government organisations. And I'm not saying that for DRS, obviously we work commercially and it's different, but Network Rail, same thing. I think we expect too much. I do.
Mm-hmm. So just want to start this question with congratulations. You won the Woman with Edge Award at the Women of the Year Awards. Just how did that feel? It must have been quite a proud moment for all of your work to get recognised, and just a big old well done, basically.
It really was. And to be the Woman with Edge was amazing. They showed this video up beforehand where they ran through kind of all these, the words, and they had some great music playing. They ran through these words of what Freeth had put together to say this was the Woman with Edge. And I was looking at it thinking, because there were 2 awards that day. There was Businesswoman of the Year and Woman with Edge. And I was looking and I thought, God, I think I'd love to be able to win that one. Because I just felt it reflected some of my things far more. It talked about being a disruptor and this sort of thing. And when I did, I was absolutely over the moon. My family with it kind of grew. I was only going with a couple of people from work, and then my auntie came to see me, and she's getting elderly, and I thought, she'd love a dinner like this. She lives in Worcester, so she doesn't live far from Birmingham. She'd love to go to an event like this. I'll get her a ticket and invite her, and she can sit with my 2 work colleagues, because I knew I was going to be on a different table. So I invited my auntie. So then my dad phones me from Portugal and said, we're coming home to help you celebrate with you all. I said, hang on, I wouldn't watch anything. We're coming home to do it. And he was going to be home with his partner over that time. So I thought, okay, well, I'll have to get them tickets as well, because he's really close to his sister. And then I thought, well, I can't take them and not take my husband, can I? So then I had to get a ticket for my husband. So basically, I was so glad I was on a different table, because my friend, one of my work colleagues and friends who sat with them, videoed them. They're just all in buckets of tears. They're all bawling. Unfortunately, they were at the back of the room. You want to feel proud, but you don't want to appear like, you're too cocky. And there's this whole mix of emotions about, how do I look pleased about this without looking overconfident and things like this? Because you are just, and it always sounds so cliche to sort of say, I was just really grateful, and I don't know that I am any more worthy than anybody else, or than lots of people I know. But then people will say, that's just being like false modesty, but it's not. It's how you feel. I know some amazing women. In the last few years, particularly being so involved with equality, diversity and inclusion, and involved with the Northern Power Women, I have met so many women that inspire and are doing fantastic things out there quietly and in their own time and stuff, that genuinely you get an award like that, and of course I was proud, but the next thing in my head is like, I could name you a dozen women who could be up here as well.
Definitely, and I suppose especially with awards and all of that, I think we're always guilty of being our biggest critics and stuff for it, but I'll ask you the difficult question that we hadn't really prepped you for before today. Is there any particular moment in your own career that really stands out that you're really proud of, that's a defining moment to you?
I suppose there's two things. One's from a personal perspective, because it made such a difference to the way that I approached everything.
Yeah.
I took up adventuring. I mentioned earlier on that I consider myself a bit of an adventurer, and it was a long story, but I had a kind of epiphany moment with my son when he was about 3, and I felt I wasn't being a good example for him, and I decided to I was coming up for, I was 39, coming up to 40, and I decided I needed to do something different. So I signed up to climb Kilimanjaro, and I did 2 mountains. I did Mount Meru and Kilimanjaro a year later in my 40th year. That was probably a defining moment in that it really changed me, and the reason it changed me, I went on, it was really interesting. I almost didn't make it. I felt quite ill, and I got up Meru okay, but Kili got quite difficult. When I look back, it was getting to the top of Kili, and then realising what that did. So that was that. From a work perspective, I think I've done all sorts of stuff that I've loved, and I've had some mad challenges when I went to work in Venezuela and things. But actually, I think it's the time that I've spent with DRS. And it's that whole time. I can't pick a specific project. In the 4 years I've been with DRS, I have worked really hard, and I've had a great team around me, but I've worked really hard to try and improve the equality, diversity and inclusion in the company. It's a very male industry, freight, very male.
Yeah.
I mean, the rail, as you will be aware,
I was going to say, we've noticed.
Rail is relatively male dominated. Trust me, freight is seriously male dominated, for reasons you can understand. Because at least in rail, you've got project management jobs, you've got station jobs, you've got far more fixed driver jobs even. So even passenger companies for drivers could probably have more success, because you haven't got all sorts of night shifts and weird things like that are problematic for people with families and things. But freight is even more so. And I got a number of depots that are heavy engineering, because we maintain our own locos. So I have a number of heavy engineering depots, and again, that's very heavy engineering and what is traditionally called dirty engineering. So we weren't, as a company, very proactive from an ED&I perspective, and we didn't have female representation in a lot of areas. And we now do. We have 4 female apprentices in engineering, which is the first time we'd ever had anybody in 25 years. And they're doing brilliantly. We have 6 or 8 female drivers, which way surpasses anything that any of the other freight companies have got. I think most of them might have 1. So that's, but the thing is, to be fair, it's still rubbish. I have 180 drivers, so 8 is still rubbish.
There's always work to be done.
Oh, there really is. It's everything, but one of the things I also looked at really carefully, because I wanted to try to make sure that this female agenda doesn't impact the way that the men that work in our organisations feel. And I think there is some of that currently, and again, I understand it a little, I think. Now, that doesn't mean, we should stop beating that drum, because it's still, we have such a lot to do. But I worked really hard on the flexible working policies and the pay for maternity and paternity to change those types of policies in the organisation and communicate that change really consistently to make sure that the men realise that these things were for them too. So we pay, if somebody goes pregnant with us, you get 6 months full pay, then 3 months SMP, and then 3 months non-pay. We now offer the same to men in the company whose partners are pregnant. It's shared with them. But we also really looked at the flexible working, because flexible working policies, for example, lots of men in organisations know they're sort of there, but they kind of think they're for the women. Well, actually, that's not true, because this is about life balance, it's about families, it's about things around your work that you may need that for. So we did a lot of work in focusing on the flexible policies as well, and making sure that our male colleagues understood that it was for them as well. And again, that's worked. I mean, I have 11 people out on flexible working now, and only 2 of them are women and the rest of them are men. And that's growing all the time as people are finding, in today's world, that you want different things in the way you work. There's been a lot of work done. Those are just 2 of the kind of examples. We've done a huge amount of work in the way we recruit, in how we look at things, and it's an ongoing piece of work. It's not one I'm going to get to finish, because I'm actually leaving DRS in the summer, but it is an ongoing piece of work that I think the fellow executives behind me are certainly going to keep with that agenda and keep on, and that's probably what I'm proudest. And I'm hoping that the types of differences we've made in DRS ripple through the freight industry and some of our competitors. When we can pick up a member of staff easier than they can, I'm hoping that they might be able to look and go, why is that? And follow suit and bring in those same types of policies, and that's the way these things will begin to even out as we go through.
definitely. Like you say, it's sort of the first steps in that legacy, but hopefully it can be a much wider change. Sort of
That's what I would like. I'd like to see it go past DRS. And as say, if DRS can get themselves a competitive edge in saying the recruiting the best talent as a result of things like that, then hopefully the other companies will see they need to follow suit on some of this, and it will improve it across the board.
So just one final question. I know you have just said that you're moving on to pastures new in the summer, but what are you hoping the future can hold for the rail industry, whether you're looking at it as your role now as Managing Director at DRS or moving into just being a regular passenger?
Well, to be fair, I hardly ever drive anymore because I hate the roads. You cannot, people talk about trains being delayed, but generally speaking, you can give or take a certain length of time. You can guarantee what time your train's going to get in, which you simply cannot do with the road. So I'm going to always be a passenger. For the rail industry, I'm most interested in the north, obviously, so I'm looking forward to seeing, and I'm hoping that I get a chance, even as I move on to different things in the summer, I'm hoping to get a chance to maybe have some influence or have some role in seeing how we make sure that those things that need to happen here in the north, that the rail strategy for the north, along with HS2, phase 2A and B, do continue and carry on. I think it's absolutely imperative for passengers. I think it's imperative for freight, and as a future passenger, I'd like to see it. I also think that for the north, we are Manchester. I think this week was said to be one of the fastest growing cities that there is, but we need more infrastructure and transport connectivity to keep that. And it's not like everybody says, well, you've got to spend the money in the south because that's the economic heart. It isn't like if you spend it here, we're going to steal anything from the south. There is enough for both places. There is more than enough for both places, and actually this could become as big an economic area as you can look at London if we can put that transport in. The reason it's not currently is we don't have it. So it's always when you get more there because it's like, but we're in a chicken and egg here. So I think transport is paramount, fundamental to the growth of the north. And I know if you're a southerner you might think completely differently, but as a northerner we know it's great up here. We know this is the best place. We know that we've got our mountains on our doorsteps literally, and our cities that are thriving, and we can grow as a region to become a real power.
Certainly, and as you say, without that sort of change, and the status quo will never change, it will always be weighted towards elsewhere.
Correct.
No, I think sort of as that runs through the questions we've had, we obviously let the podcast run on a bit longer than normal, but that was purely because you were so...
Don't apologise.
It was so passionate and honest to hear not just the work side, but also the professional development, the learning, sort of that side. To hear you talk, I think it's certainly going to have been a benefit to our listeners, and I really hope they sort of appreciate it, because we certainly did. It was amazing to hear, and with the timing thing, I think you might have sorted mine and Ailsa's lives out. It will be far more organised.
Yeah, okay. Well, if you want a hand out, drop me an email.
But no, we really do appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
This podcast is brought to you by Trans-City Rail, the premier rail network and events brand connecting buyers with suppliers.
Join the chat on social media using the hashtag WeAreRTM, or send us an email via the form on our website.
If you enjoyed today's podcast and discussion, don't forget to subscribe, like, or give us a rating on whatever streaming service you're using. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.